Welcome to the Noble Ape Podcast, Ape Reality. I'm Tom Barbalet, and today this serves as the August 2007 Mailout. Well, before I begin on the month's musings with regards to Noble Ape development, I want to say that I have started an Ape Reality group in Facebook. So if you belong to Facebook, and if you want to join the Ape Reality group, it will be wonderful to get a sense of who listens to these podcasts. When you put software online or when you release a podcast, it goes out to an anonymous audience, and it's really the responsibility of the audience in some regard to make contact back. If it was commercial software, obviously these things would be tracked, and I don't really know how it would be tracked if this was something else other than podcasting in terms of communication. However, it will be wonderful to get a sense of the folks that listen to the podcast. I've invited, I think, 3 folks so far who I know listen to this podcast, and if there are more of you, just put in the group search Ape Reality in Facebook and join the group. Be wonderful to see faces associated with this podcast. And also, I'm not sure how it's going to work out, but I'm sure there'll be some kind of feedback or something like that. There'll be some way to make the group actually functional as opposed to just an ability to get a sense of... There are about 60 people that download Ape Reality on a regular basis, and really I probably could name 4 or 5 off the top of my head. So it'll be wonderful to get a sense of the folks that listen to this podcast. This month has been particularly interesting. Both issues really relate to interviews. First, I was interviewed for podcast 411, which wasn't about artificial life. It wasn't about Noble Ape, really. It was about podcasting, which seemed quite strange. And the feedback from that has been... well, less than I expected, actually. It seems that podcasting is very organic, and very few people go to a central source for podcasting information anymore. So, this is a wonderful thing. This is what I want ultimately with open source too, in terms of many different open source licenses and a lot of quite independent open source development. So if the same is true for podcasting, so much the better. And I got a relatively positive set of feedback from it, so it wasn't all bad. In terms of actual subscriptions to either Ape Reality and Biota.org, not so many. And I get the sense that when you have a community like artificial life developers and artificial life interested folk, there's probably a finite number of those that are going to subscribe to podcasts that would be interested in that anyway. And really, it's just a matter of growing the size of podcasting in order to get more people to listen to these podcasts. So, not a huge swell in numbers in terms of new listeners from the Podcast 411 interview, but it was interesting, and there are going to be interviews in the future. I've taken an interview with another podcast, the Sci-Fi Show, which is yet to be aired, but when that is aired, it'll be interesting to see whether the science fiction grouping is slightly larger or more interested in some regards than the Podcast 411 audience. In terms of interviews I took, this month has been the Steve Grand interview month for Biota.org. 3 interviews, 2 taken close together and 1 taken over the weekend just past. This is an interesting set of interviews because my hope really coming into these interviews was that Steve Grand would shed some insight into developing artificial life which was lacking from the contemporary artificial life development. And 2 things I found interesting. Candidly, I tried to engage Steve Grand on a kind of deeper level with regards to his views on artificial life, both prior to the interviews and at the conclusion of the interviews, in terms of just talking about Noble Ape and various components of what I was doing, and see if he had any broader interest with regards to these kind of things. To see if he was a pluralist, basically. And he didn't seem to be particularly interested. I think the narrative per the interviews is really that he's someone who has followed his own thread throughout. And in terms of collaboration and group interest and things like that, I guess the future is yet to be written in terms of Steve Grand's involvement with Biota.org. But, I wanted to welcome him in. It's going to be a similar welcoming for all the older, I don't want to say founding fathers, but these kind of folk that are involved with artificial life back in the day. I want to make them welcome and usher them into the discussion that Biota.org is currently doing in some regard through podcast rather than conference. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out with Steve in particular, and whether he can be a blueprint for other more kind of founding folk associated with artificial life development. All seem to be in some regard quite difficult in all terms of approach and in terms of actually integrating them with the contemporary community. It took me about 4 months, as I said in the introduction to the Steve Grand interview, to actually get him on the podcast, and it took a lot of reassuring and a lot of communication which was kind of extraneous to actually directly communicate communicating with him. So, it'd be interesting to see. But it's part of the biota.org process, and I think ultimately the insight that comes from biota.org can only strengthen developments like Noble Ape. So, it's all intertwined in some regard, hence its feature in the podcast. In addition to this, funnily enough, I've actually been touching the Noble Ape source code very recently, the simulation source code, because I'm interested in moving the simulation source code into networks. I've editorialized this in the previous podcast. I don't want to cover too much shared ground, but to say it has made me think quite a bit about what this idea of artificial intelligence in a simulated environment is really about, and that's kind of artificial life that Noble Ape is fundamentally. It's an interesting process when you start exploring where randomization lies, true randomization, and where things that are periodic and things that are stochastic lie. What is the part that is actually the artificial life? Where does the simulation of the outside environment stop and the actual artificial life entity start? And this comes through a Biota Conversations posting that's gone on recently, but it's also something that has been a method in my own thinking in terms of translating aspects of the simulation into atoms as opposed to a kind of intertwined, tangled mess. This will be pretty well on the cutting edge of the Intel development in particular, because once this is done, it will mean that the new multi-core processors or what have you are just basically networks with slightly better responses than Ether networks, for example. So it'll be interesting to see how this translates. It really is about changing my own view with regards to how the simulation is constructed and how the various parts hold together. Speaking of this, I've also been tinkering with the graphics, and primarily with translating the graphics from the current dots on the screen into proper polygonal moving, clawing, clutching, holding, manipulating creatures of the Noble Ape variety and possibly the fierce feline variety and various other things like birds and lizards and fish and all this other stuff that the Noble Apes will interact with. And this is very slow going in some regard. It's got days of breakthrough and then days of just a lot of mathematics and drawing. It is getting me back into the raw elements of what the Noble Ape simulation was originally designed for. The graphics continue to be a work in progress, and somehow it will all fit together, and my time is not necessarily limited, but my Noble Ape development time is really ultimately luxury time, and with podcasts and these kind of things, the development time tends to be pushed to parts of time where I'm not vocally coherent or things like that. It actually takes a remarkable amount of energy to do these performances that become podcasts. When I'm not feeling language coherent, that is typically when I do my code development for the simulation. This is a little addition post-recording. I recorded the original Mailout 2 days ago, and I discovered today that Cafe Press has raised its prices by $4 on the standard giveaway t-shirt that I had given away previously. I think this eliminates my ability to use this as a promotional item for Noble Ape, and I'm very disappointed that Cafe Press, whilst you would imagine would be getting more profitable as more people used it, decided to raise their prices again. On the developer mailing list, I characterized 4 issues that Cafe Press has done. They raised their prices by about $4 about a year ago. They used to have a colour t-shirt discount, so certain coloured t-shirts at certain times would be discounted. I used that to get a number of green Noble Ape t-shirts, the only kind of Noble Ape t-shirt I own. They also eliminated their volume discount, which was very, very useful with regards to Grey Thumb and Intel and Apple and all these kind of places that have received volumes of Noble Ape t-shirts. And now they've raised their prices by $4. So unfortunately, I'm going to suspend the Noble Ape t-shirt giveaways, which is terrible. It was a great promotional item, and I think it was indicative of the kind of philosophy I wanted to convey with Noble Ape in terms of my ability to send folks t-shirts just out of, respect for their interest. So it's a sad day. I'm going to announce this through the Ape Reality page on the Noble Ape website. As the podcast 411 t-shirt giveaway stands, I think there are only about 5 remaining. I found out this price increase today by sending out 2 Noble Ape t-shirts, so sad day. However, the Cafe Press store will still remain open, and if you're interested in purchasing Noble Ape related apparel, it's still available. I am going to have a look for a cheaper alternative, and that is an ongoing investigation. I would like to offer things like the original manual at a slightly cheaper rate, and we'll investigate other online printing options for that, and other online t-shirt options with regards to the Noble Ape t-shirts. So stay tuned for more information on that. This concludes this little additional segment. So in roundup, if you're a member of Facebook, go to the group section, type in Ape Reality, and join the Ape Reality group. group. There's going to be more in the future, some more interesting interviews and conversations with biota.org, and some low-level development associated with randomization and spreading the simulation over a network, which will look very interesting, I think. Probably starting in a command-line version and then moving back into the new graphics, maybe. It will all be in the future. If you have any questions, comments, want to get in contact for any reason, tom@nobel8.com, or the Facebook group associated with Ape Reality. Thank you very much for tuning into this podcast. Look forward to you tuning into the next podcast.